Welcome to the workshop on components in PMLA in 2002 amendments and for payments new methods. We would like to begin by thanking you all for being a part of Pursuit 2021, Combating Financial Frauds with Technology. The event is supported by Invest India and Startup India. We would like to thank our session partner Refinitiv, Gold partner Takeda, Bronze partner on Fido, and Knowledge partner EY. Without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Vipul Tamhane, founder and CEO, Existat, who will host today's workshop. Welcome, Mr. Tamhane. Over to you.
Thanks, Shivani. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. So, basically, start off with sharing my screen. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today's topic is the PMLA and the new payment methods. Uh, this is organized by the Internet and Mobile Association of India. I would just like to give you disclaimers before I start. The banks, the entities, the government institutions, or government regulations that are mentioned are not looked at from a weakness perspective, if any. We believe all the mechanism has at least some more room for improvement. The entities, resolutions mentioned in the presentation are just for the purpose of this workshop and without any intention to contest against them or to create any intentional harm to reputation or otherwise to those entities, industries, forms of operations, regulations, so on and so forth. The names, private or public, incidences, timelines regarding any person or organization or nation are referred from public domain for the purpose of this training. This has no intention of slander, accusation, defamation, or any such ill intentions, uh, neither from the presenter, that's me, and nor from the Internet and Mobile Association of India. The material in this training is analyzed, studied, and put together to the best of the presenter's knowledge and expertise to help the viewers understand the basics of anti-money laundering compliance and doesn't reflect or neither IMAI's nor presenters organization's view as an organization. Right. Introducing myself. So I am Vipul Tamhane, as Shivani introduced. I am founder CEO with Existat. I'm editor-in-chief at Diplomacy Direct. At Existat, we are into consulting uh, legal firms, CA companies, CA firms, and all the BFSI institutions regarding all the requisite uh, compliances, all the requisite, so we do everything right from gap analysis, vulnerabilities, consulting, uh, so on and so forth. My my background is that I'm an MBA in International Business from Symbiosis and an LLM in International Commercial Law from Newcastle Law School from UK. We'll see all my other certifications. I'm an anti-money laundering and financial risk professional. And rest that is on your screen. So I'll just move forward. Mhm. So basically today we are, Shivani, just before I start with the presentation, am I audible and is everything fine?
Yeah. Everything is
Okay,
fine. You're
okay,
clearly
thanks, Shivani. Thanks, Shivani. Okay. So, uh, why show this screen, right? So basically, PMLA, which is your Prevention of Money Laundering Act of 2002, encompasses everything backward integrates into malpractices and majorly into terrorism financing, right? Uh, the 2611, this event has a special place for me in my life because I started my LLM in 2008, and then through my first year of or first semester of my studies, which were more, my subjects were more into corporate law, mergers and acquisitions. And then this event happened, and in my city, Mumbai, and it changed all the perspective. And then I diverted or changed all my subjects to uh, conflict resolution, dispute resolution, international inter agency uh, international interagency coordination and all of that, right? And my final year paper was on curbing international terrorist funding, and this is how my anti-money laundering journey actually started. Uh, Everything in world actually took a change or a turn when World Trade Center event happened on 9/11 2001. And then there are these other events also have you know happened across the world. So Kuwait City bombing, Oklahoma City bombing, San Bernardino firing, and everything. And you'll see there was Mumbai bomb blast and Uri attacks and Pulwama attacks, and so world over all these things actually today, as a fresh instance, we are looking at Taliban uh, taking over Afghanistan. And where does all the money comes from? Somewhere or the other, it is laundered into the economy, right? Also, we look at the economic and social consequences of money laundering on any nation, right? So there is unemployment, there is public unrest, there is poverty, there is economic sanctions, so on and so forth. And then there are predicate crimes that are also addressed in PMLA, and the so narcotics, arms dealing, and you know human trafficking, so on and so forth. So I'll take us back to one instance for the starters, where I want to cover how very so the transitioning is going to be, see, basically this is connecting new payment methods to the PMLA and whatever RBI guidelines say is kind of a daunting task. And generally, when I conduct my sessions, I generally, for PMLA itself, it's like a 2 day, 2 hours or a 3 hours each kind of. So today I will have to kind of rush a bit. So please stay with me here. So starting with the 9/11 case, the plot actually cost Al Qaeda, somewhere in range of 400 to $500,000 totally, right? So the cost in it was cheap, and the devastation changed the entire world. Uh, the hijackers, the average cash amount was built in 3,000 to 5,000 to fly under the radar. The hijackers often use the same address and phone numbers. The KYCs were almost similar. The the banking system was almost similar. The ATM transactions that occurred, or one a hijacker present at all the times, which was captured on the ATM camera. Then the debit cards were there. There were usage of a lot of you know pay on the go kind of cards. So we'll look into those prepaid cards also. And there were numerous deposits from many uh, different jurisdictions. Um, we look at more than 100,000 wired amounts coming from UAE, Saudi Arabia. and everything, even Germany, and everything converged in the terms, in the time terms of 15 months or so. So everything gave the law enforcement, or if there was a vigilance in that way, uh, could have sensed or smelled the uh, the the red flags that were happening actually. Right? Uh, so again, this is kind of a premise to what we are going to say. And then talking about the social economic consequences. So macroeconomic consequences are there. There is a rise in predicate crime. It actually ruins the legitimate private sector. It weakens the financial institutions. We see dampening effect on the foreign investment. So FDI starts slowing down, government loss of economic control, bad economic decisions due to the distorted data. So maybe the data is all fluffed up because of, or it's blown up because of the illicit money coming into the economy. And then international sanctions follow it. There is a loss of reputation, loss of trade, all of that. And criminal activities actually, so organized crime, embezzlement, insider trading, bribery, computer frauds for today's discussion and everything. So all these things actually culminate. So again, why do we look at these compliances, or why do we look at these statutes or the regulations found by different governments coming together, or we adopting some regulations or systems, or adopted by the others, and how in tandem we work with different institutions in collaboration internationally, and how things happen even internally in our financial mechanism. We'll have a look at that, right? So why all of this is, where can the money go from your financial institution operation? So to the terrorist organization, like we saw, to the safe haven country, to a non-extradition treaty country, to a terrorist nation state, individuals who are helping for cash smuggling, uh, to even influence the stock market, generate imbalance in the insurance infrastructure, mortgaging and loaning to for some kind of an illicit transaction, uh, or to you know asset conversion for some odd reason, foreign currency exchange for, again, into the high risk geography, so on and so forth, right? So basically, we are going to look at three broader objectives, right? To understand the concept of new payment statements, so that will be very brief. To bring out and its security risks and triggers of MLTF, and to understand working of RBI, ED, and the other allied regulatory mechanism and the provisions of PMLA 2002. So we'll look at online finance and insurance. We'll look at the virtual cash. We look at online gambling, online job scams, everything. So everything is dealt online, and there has to be vigilance and monitoring to all these things. And then there are provisions in our constitution and the PMLA and everything to keep a check on that, and then let the law enforcement take over wherever. So we'll also look at the obligations of the obligated entities, the reporting entities, and all of that. So looking into the electronic fund transfers, again, there are payment gateways. We see e-businesses. There is, EFTs are generally used for internet-based identity frauds, who scam people over, some social platforms, transfer of money to a certain location using these services, and we look at currency fund frauds, so on and so forth. So these instruments can be conduit for so your payment methods and black web server operations, and so on and so forth. And then we look at, so as we are going through these new payment methods, so basically prepaid cards, internet payment systems, mobile payment systems, and digital precious metals can aid into cross-border value transfer, right? So so money laundering is all about transfer of value, if not essentially transfer of cash. Uh, Pooled businesses accounts for an e-wallet can hold, funds for multiple users, anonymous holders, unknown funds are possible in this scenario. There can be, it can be a clear substitute for smuggling bulk cash, right? And then high value limits, and there are no limits on some electronic purses or smart cards or, global access to the, cash like we saw, from ATMs. Then we can look at the blockchain, the cryptocurrency. Now, this is by far pretty safe, but then because it's a decentralized kind of an operation, so there are a lot of changes to happen. But then again, there are ways to uh, uh, launder money via cryptocurrencies as well. So basically, according to FATF 2014 report, so virtual a report on virtual currencies. Uh, but so any VCs, right? Virtual currencies, whatever is convertible can be used. Convertible from your general fiat to your crypto can be used for money laundering, right? So we'll just look at the centralized and decentralized nature of it. There are three uh, constituents in this mechanism. One is the user, there is a exchanger, and there is an administrator. The user is a person who obtains virtual currency purchased by a real fiat. An exchanger is somebody who does the exchange, and the administrator is somebody who is issuing the virtual currency and who has an authority to redeem such receipts, right? In a Bitcoin-based money laundering, a wallet is actually registered with an administrator, but it does not provide the actual identities behind the corresponding wallets, right? So that is where you can actually breach it. So I'll give you a case study. There was this administrator, which was Liberty Reserve, maintained about 5.5 million users with almost 100 million transactions with more than 8 to 10 billion worth of value transfers. And it was all intentional for money laundering because they never registered themselves as NSB with FinCEN in the US, right? Uh, then so that's the uh, VC, the virtual currency bit of it. Then we look at non-banking financial institutions, with a plethora of service provision. So components of credit card industry or credit card associations, like your Visa, Amex, Master, and then issuing banks, the ones those who solicit and issue the cards. And then money launderers can have a front business established in another country and then use a credit card in the same or the home country and pay the bills in the country where he shows the front business, right? So the value is transfer again. A money launderer places his ill-gotten funds in accounts as um, uh, something to front with the offshore banks, and then accesses these funds using again these credit or debit cards associated with the offshore accounts. Then we look at the third-party payment processors. We call them TPPs, and these are which have a contract with issuing or acquiring banks to provide payment processing services to these merchants. And then TPPs benefit well with high return rates from unauthorized transactions, also can easily mask transactions and hide customer relationships among a large number of, give and take. So all the deals, the transaction, and uh, they can be privately commissionized or incentivized. So, for a bigger money laundering operation, these can be used. Then, when we look at the MSBs, typically, so money services businesses usually provide currency exchange, money transmission, check cashing, money laundering services, right? So they transmit or can convert these currencies, right? So forex dealers, check cashers, money transmitters, seller of prepaid cards, over-the-counter sellers, so on and so forth. So they operate out of a generally a brick and mortar location, and these days primarily on the internet, right? So they are difficult to monitor. They also use a lot of dark web to have these codes or these numbers float, and the the uh, the parent organization or the conducting organization, the administrator won't have a clue, right? They can make funds available to the criminal organization, a destination country in the destination setting itself, right? And then using of insurance. So this insurance money, so basically insurance operates out of independent brokers, right? Life insurance and annuities are actually considered as a prime target for criminals for laundering money. And then single payment insurance bonds are also very lucrative to park ill-gotten gains, right? So these are like a low-hanging fruits. Then one can buy insurance policies, pay in cash, and surrender in. Uh, so there are some in some areas, some jurisdictions, insurance companies offer something like a free lookup period, right? And then uh, once you surrender into the free lookup period, you can get the legitimate check on your paid cash. That's how the uh, the value is converted. Looking at the stockbrokers again, everything is happening online. So internet is the prime medium for it, and money launderers can capitalize on this industry as the speed of transaction is high and the speed and volume is tremendous, right? And can operate from multiple jurisdictions. So securities can be used to primarily layer the funds. So if somebody is new here, I want to just say that in money laundering, there are three stages. One is placement, then is layering, and third is integration into the financial system, right? So uh, so securities can be a very good conduit for layering the funds, and one can only hold funds in the account and not trade, and even that can be done. So example, two or more unrelated accounts at security firm traded for illiquid or low price security, which are penny stocks actually, and then suddenly simultaneously they send or receive the value and the stock is closed, right? So or it just stays dormant. So basically these are the ways that money launderers can operate through the new payment systems. Now, uh, so before enactment of now, let's start looking slowly into the PMLA. So before the enactment of Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, we had systems in place, or sorry, we have regulations in place, we had uh, statutes in place, we had conservation of foreign exchange and prevention of smuggling activities, 1974. We had Income Tax Act 61. We had Benami Transaction Prohibition 88. We had IPCN, Code of criminal procedures of 73. We had narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances Act of 1985, and we had anti-narcotic prevention, anti-narcotics and psychotropic substances narcotic law. But un these were all disconnected. These were all uncoordinated, haphazard, ad hoc in their government. So basically, uh, after 9/11, FinCEN came up with their Bank Secrecy Act, and then then the Patriot Act and everything, and then we started actually strategizing, linearizing the entire look up to uh, our anti-money laundering operations in India. And so basically, we also adhere to the International Convention of Suppression of Finance of Terrorism of 99. We do UN Convention against Transactional Organized Crime 2000. We do Organized Convention against Corruption 2003. But again, how 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 is the international handshake happening with our mechanism is something that will come uh, later on, right? So this is how the progression happened in India. So if we look at so we had FATF establishment, we had FATF recommendations. There are 40 plus 9 recommendations with FATF. We had Egmont Group's establishment, and we'll look quickly into Egmont as well. Here, the revision of FATF recommendations happened with addition of 9 recommendations into it, with provisioning into the uh, terrorism funding. 9/11 attacks, US Patriot Act, uh, special FATF recommendations over here. Uh, and then if we see here, we quickly adopted the PMLA in 2002 in tandem with all the happenings. All so basically, RBI and our Ministry of Finance is pretty quick in uh, adopting the global convention, and that's the reason we in the APG we are one of the plenary members, and we are one of the very significant members with FATF and the APG plenary or the FSRB. Sorry, we set up FIO India in 2004. We enforced PMLA in 2005. There were some amendments in PMLA in 2009. There were few in 2008 as well, if I remember it right. And then all the RBI, SEBI guidelines and everything, right? So let us look at the, no, wait. Uh, so let's talk a bit more about PMLA, right? So uh, in Part A and Part C, PMLA actually looks a lot into the IPCB, NDPC, explosive substance, Arms Act, wildlife, uh, uh, so immoral traffic. There is a Prevention of Corruption Act and everything. So it actually brings everything together. Part C basically gets the trans-border crimes, that is the black money bit of it into the picture, and then the economic crime. So just a minute, please see. Economic crime information report, yeah, uh, which is prepared by the ED to the further action of it, right? And then uh, the FIR goes to the police, and the EOW gets into this, and then the ED acts on it. Then we also have the Tax Evasion Black Money Act, and so all of these things are provision. We have Section 2. We have Section 238, which looks into the corporate creditors and the beneficiaries and all of that. And then your PMLA 2012 amendments, uh, which got in effect in 2013, February 2013. Sorry. So basically, um, it enhances the money laundering offenses a bit, and it brings a lot more provision to it. And then we look into the casino, the gold of precious metals. We look at the, so basically all these things come under the Registration Act. So the registrars and the sub-registrars, those who register the assets and everything. So all of those things come into it. right? And then there is proceeds to crime section 2(1)(u), which takes care of proceeds to crime for a property which is movable and immovable property, any linkages related to that, any value transfers, any uh, uh, out of jurisdiction value transfers, uh, the working of the MNCs and the money transfers related to that. So all of that. Section 67 and 41 actually enforces is enforced by the bars and the civil courts to have jurisdiction over the PMLA cases, right? Uh, and then section 45 takes us to the bailing out unless the ED recommends that, and the bail provision is again to the offences which are below 1 crore, and then section 13 enables ED to audit through a certified CA and so on and so forth. Uh, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, actually, I'll just quickly go through it. So basically, violation of uh, so Government of India has this brought in uh, 1967, which was replaced by the Unlawful Activities Prevention Amendment in 2008, and so the UAPA also got amended and uh, got the terrorist activities included in 2009. And that's the reason why we first look at all the ill effects and everything to come to. So these are basically the regulatory, or this is our mechanism, right? Uh, uh, so how India fights money laundering is, by enforcement of the PMLA, and all these are the enforcement and um, the uh, the observing bodies, the regulating bodies, and uh, for anything right from freezing the transactions to looking into the self-disclosures or the border movements of the high-risk products or high-risk or high-value assets. Uh, we look at the correspondent banking bit of it, uh, provision of looking into the payable through accounts, the shell bank operations, the private banking operation bit of it, regulating the PEPs, designated targets that are there on the sanction list. So basically, we look into or we incorporate or integrate the OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control list, which is published or which is by the OFAC, which is under the governance of US Department of Treasury, right? And then uh, the fund transfers and everything, right? So basically, that is how it's governed. And oh, I'm actually running ahead. Sorry. And then we look at uh, the KYC, the CAP process, the CAP for those who don't know, the customer acceptance process, the customer identification process, the transaction monitoring process, the risk management process, and everything, right? And then we look at the transaction flows and everything. We look at the so basically uh, uh, anti-money. So RBI responds to anti-money laundering and CFT deficiencies identified within its regulatory framework from so continuing to safeguard basically to safeguard the banking system, enhance financial transparencies in the MSBs. We look at the illicit bulk cash out of the jurisdiction, also in coming in the jurisdiction. We look at the promotion of transparency, so on and so forth, right? So I just skip the video. So let me talk about the FIU FIU India. So I'll come to the Egmont, and Egmont proposed and governs the, or rather, uh, uh, it has a governance of inter-agency, internationally handshake between different FIUs, and then uh, our FIU is set up by Government of India at the Central National Agency Responsibility, actually basic for receiving, processing, analyzing, and disseminating the information related to suspected financial transactions. And why we do that, we'll come to the MLAT part of it later on, right? It consists of one director, uh, the FIU staff, and then the reporting of the coordinating bodies with the local law enforcement, right? And then we also see these different FIUs from all over the world. So we look at OSTRAC, we look at uh, Her Majesty's uh, National Crime Agency. So NCA, we look at FinCEN, we look at Mexico's CNBVC, and the basically National Banking and Securities Commission from Mexico. Then we look at formation of joint FIUs. So by Luxembourg, UK, Italy, Financial Authority of France, uh, uh, basically in conjunction with the Benelux countries. And you have FIU.net, which features a match 3, which helps detect common subjects and templates regarding different FIUs. Right. Now we look at the Egmont Group of Financial Intelligence Unit, which actually governs itself under different regions, and they have different working groups. So there are 5 working groups which are headed by the HOFIU, and then there are IT, legal, outreach, training, and other different workshops. This is how interdepartmental international handshakes happen uh, between different FIUs governed by the or proposed by the Egmont Group. And uh, uh, basically, there is an MLAT process which I am going to talk about. But the handshake happens between a country A and country B. It's required to formulate documentation according to the said BIS guidelines, sent to exchange in between them, and then so okay, let me get to the MLAT process. So on your screen is the MLAT process. MLAT is the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. Again, the way we saw the handshake between these two countries for information sharing and looking into the suspicious transactions and looking incidentally into the CDD part of it, and then uh, connecting the money trail or the fund trail to a high risk jurisdiction, so on and so forth. Right. So how is the MLAT procedure taken? How does that take place? Is the MLAT has its evidence retrieval system, and the central authority of the requesting country sends a commission regatory, which is the letter of request to the central authority of the other country, and then these letters include informations that are required, the nature of request, followed to the T, the criminal exchanges, exchange of evidence and everything, and the central authority that receives the request, they send it to the local investigator. The local investigator gets in touch with the local law enforcement. The local law enforcement drills deep into the banking system, and this is where the operators or the institutions in BFSI are connected to the larger picture, where the enforcement directorate in our case uh, comes with an MLAT request from some other country to find out a money trail, and then the investigator asks the central authority for permission to remove the evidence to the requested country, for which again the obligated entities in our jurisdiction have to have those records in place, which is again as a provision to the PMLA. And then the central authority uh, authorizes the transfer, and the evidence is sent to that given country. And then it also might be a case that the local witness may be needed to attend the court hearings in the requested country also. Now we look at the Enforcement Directorate very quick. Law enforcement agency and economic intelligence agency responsible for enforcing economic laws and fighting economic crime in India. This is the structure that how it goes: regional director, director, deputy assistant director, so on and so forth. Then we look at SEBI. SEBI again works under the section 447 of the PAS Act 2013, uh, which is included with effect in 2018. And then basically market regulation, looking into unlawful entry of illicit funds into the system is something that SEBI looks into. So the CKYC kicks into picture and is all for including banks, goes through the KRA, so on and so forth. Right? Looking at IRDA, basically section 51A of the UAPA, which we saw earlier, and the UN Security Council resolution of 1373 of 2001 actually covers all the foreign countries funding in, or rather foreign funds coming into the Indian insurance framework, and again same way, vice versa. And then the obligated entities are supposed to have the record keeping according to the Master Circular AML-CFT, RBI Master Circular AML-CFT guideline of 2010. When we look at the income tax, again, once under the PMLA, the properties that are marked under the Black Money Act or the Income Tax Act for the unaccounted money or the tax evasion bit of it, the section 10 of Black Money Act takes precedence over here. And then the ED opens up the case into its register, and then once the PMLA thing happens, these properties and assets are equivalent to the external unaccounted properties which are now attached to that particular case, and then the proceedings happen, and whether the assets are to be confiscated, seized, or liquidated is something that is decided by the ED, right? Or the appellate court, which takes decision into that place. So RBI guidelines under PMLA umbrella. Okay, so basically here we look at the criminals and terrorists, those who are looking into funds received by the high risk geography where the IPs got to be cracked, the IDs need to be checked, and to see where the money trail again is coming from. We look at the cyber savvy hackers, those who use proxy servers and anonymous softwares, again leaving a thread in the internal system and all of that, right? So the IP tracking has to be there in place. There is supposed to be, so all there are governance and safe practices on the internet that I guess NASCOM had come up with their bit of recommendation on it. And basically this is for again inter industry cooperation for again the same cause. Yeah, so common risks of so new payment methods is that There is absence of credit risk, so uh, funds for use with the NPMs are generally prepaid, and when there is this absence of credit risk, that service providers may have fewer incentives to obtain a full accurate information. So that's where the credit risk goes on, because when speed of transactions, again, pretty evident, so it actually complicates the process of monitoring and potentially frustrates the efforts of the enforcing bodies for freezing the funds and stopping the funds. Then we have non-face-to-face business relationships, which actually uh, again violates the recommendation 8 of the FATF, and uh, again, looking into red flags, again, very common red flags is that financial activity uh, can be inconsistent with the stated purpose of business, financial activity not commensurate with the stated occupation, use of multiple accounts at a single bank for no apparent legitimate purpose, importation of high dollar currency and instruments like traveler's check and everything, those things come into picture. Then the significant and even you know uneven transfer or deposits to a personal account over a short period. Then structuring of deposits at a multiple bank branch to avoid the RBI AML requirements, or refusal by any party conducting transactions to provide their identification. We look at the apparent usage of personal account for business purposes. We look at abrupt changes in the account activities, so on and so forth. Right. So there are many red flags to it. Looking at the internet and money laundering prevention tips, so enforce strong authentication mechanism, develop account monitoring procedures, be wary of identity theft, the policies and procedures, adopt an incident response strategy, involve trained investigators, do not rely on IT staff for forensics, uh, have external consulting, so on and so forth. Uh, Again, obligations of banking companies under the PMLA again. So uh, every financial institution. So basically, burden of proof, uh, keeping records of monitored transactions, reporting of the SARs, STRs, CTRs on time, verification and maintenance of records again, recovery of fines, disclosure of information, punishment. Uh, Understanding that there is a punishment penalizing factor to it, right? And acting on your riding effect, so on and so forth. Then we look at the powers of uh, the officers investigating under the PMLA. So we look at section 5 to provisionally attach any property derived or obtained directly or indirectly by any person or entity, which can be as a result of illicit criminal activity relating to the scheduled offense under PMN. So that is the section 5. Uh, Under section 16 can conduct the power to conduct the survey of the place. Under section 17, power to conduct search of building, place, or if there is a vessel or a vehicle or even aircraft, or seizures of record or even the property for the further attachment. We look at section 18 for conducting personal search. We look at section 19 for arresting the persons accused of committing financial offense. Under section 50, we look at the record summoning, even summons sent to the required person. Under section 12, we look at the uh, looking at the uh, records that are maintained. So basically, section 21W under the initial PMLA 2010 overlooks into the record maintenance part of it, and then these records are to be maintained internally, even after the transaction, the business relationship is over for the next 5 years, and so on. So retention of property and record. So section 20 and 21, yeah, that's there. And then power to attach a property under section 5, which is so after exercising all these powers and reasons so recorded kind of a thing happening here. The material is now under possession of the adjudicating authority. We are in the country. And the authority actually seizes the recorded property and everything, and this has to uh, have a justification under 30 days under the previous under the primary PMLA 2002. Now under the 2012 amendment, I guess this has gone to 150 days. Elements of adjudication process. So confirmation, adjudication, section 8, appellate tribunal, special court, two parallel streams. So basically this is the structure of how it happens. And then we look at the trends of increasing regulatory scrutiny, again under PMLA, but we are looking at the international numbers right now. So these are all the organizations under which, again, this is from public domain, and these are the penalties that have come into picture for AML and SAMHSA violation. But apart from the penalties, like we saw earlier, we have a reputation risk, we have compliance risk, operational risk, legal risk, financial risk. We saw how it actually affects the workings of our inner workings of our financial and monetary framework and governance at national level. And then the FDI starts dipping out, and there is an overblown projection of money and everything. So hence the penalties. And yeah, thanks. I guess I have very quickly, but it's a vast topic. I'm sorry for being really fast, but had to cover all these things.
Thank you, Mr. Damhane, for such an insightful workshop. Thank you to our wonderful audience as well. We'll catch you soon again with another exciting workshop. Please keep posted here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good.